Today we're chatting with Christian Dubay of the National Fire Protection Association, Vice President and Chief Engineer, regarding the issue of firefighter protective gear and how the NFPA is regulating or writing codes for this gear. So, Mr. Dubay, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, of course, Joe.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. This has been a very heated issue here in Quincy most recently, but I'm sure it's going to be that way around the country as well with regards to the codes that are applied to gear that firefighters wear to protect themselves in their line of duty. Can you tell me a little bit about how the NFP has changed those codes and what the most recent standards are?
Right. So I want to set the picture a little bit because there's NFPA standards, and then there's this ongoing challenge of first responder health and safety. So the standards which NFPA publishes are written by volunteers, not by NFPA. They're written by subject matter experts that sit on these committees. And so when we look at PPE for first responders, historically it was NFPA 1971. That was consolidated into a bunch of other standards and was published in 2024 into NFPA 1970, which includes the structural firefighting garments. So that was consolidated into one standard. And coincidentally, that standard has an effective date of yesterday, March 18th, 2026. Also, in addition to that, NFPA has our Fire Protection Research Foundation, which is doing extensive work on how clean is clean for gear, what is contamination that firefighters may be exposed to from the environment that they're in. They're already in a dangerous environment. And to that end, on that side as well, NFPA has a standard on contamination control. All the things that first responders are exposed to, how do we protect them from those contaminants across the board? So there's one aspect of the concerns that you're referencing locally around the PPE itself. NFPA and our Fire Protection Research Foundation, we have for years continually looked at the overall contamination, health, and wellness for our nation's first responders.
Okay. I guess the question that I have is the codes that the NFP has for the gear, the firefighters' gear, does it state that it should not contain these forever chemicals?
So the latest update in NFPA 1970 contains requirements for what the committee has termed as restricted substances. And what it does is for a very long list of chemicals, establish maximum and minimums or maximums of these chemicals that can be in there to ensure that at the best knowledge of the committee at the time, those chemicals, PFAS and PFOAs are one of those categories, are below certain limits depending on the type of chemical. And so it's difficult to pick one, but the committee has set limits across the whole families of chemicals.
Okay, okay. And do those limits have to be adhered to by various fire departments? Is that a requirement?
So what our standards carry no legal authority or weight unless they're adopted, as you know from some of the other conversations you've had with NFPA. But in the end, in order, and why I mentioned the effective date of yesterday is so effective yesterday, gear now needs to be manufactured by the various manufacturers in accordance with NFPA 1970. So new gear that'll be hitting the market will need to comply with NFPA 1970. So when fire departments purchase gear compliant with 1970, those manufacturers will have to meet those restricted substances limits.
Okay, so the manufacturers are required to
To
meet
meet
those guidelines.
all the requirements. There's performance requirements. There's lots of updates to the standard the committee made. One aspect is the issue that you're referring to around chemicals in the materials and fabrics and things like that, and they have to comply with the restricted substances list.
Or else what? What if they don't?
Well, then their gear wouldn't be certified to NFPA 1970, right? Because
Okay.
we don't dictate, the standard does not dictate how a manufacturer would develop PPE that meets the various criteria of NFPA 1970. Manufacturers have to go figure that out, determine the best way to do it, and then their gear is independently tested by third-party organizations like Underwriters Laboratories or SEI or others to verify that it meets the requirements in 1970.
Okay, all right. Now, the discussion, here in Quincy, you may be aware, is should the city purchase replacement gear that meets the new NFPA standards? Are there manufacturers currently that can produce those materials?
I'm not specifically aware of where manufacturers are in their life cycle. What I would say is that the current and best known position for PPE is the latest edition of the NFPA standards.
Okay.
So, but it's up to the local communities when and how often they purchase gear, working with their firefighters.
Sure, sure. Now, do you know, is it verified that these PFAS in this outer gear actually cause cancer?
Well, what we do know is firefighters are at much higher risk for cancer. There's just lots of evidence that shows that, and they are exposed to many things. One aspect is certain chemicals. And again, I want to go back to the larger picture here from our standard perspective. And that's why there are organizations like Brian Orman from NC State and others that are researching as these chemicals are removed from the gear, what impact does it have on gear performance? How will it perform in the field when those chemicals are modified or changed?
Right, right. Good. You to take away one thing, you could be creating another whole problem, right?
Right, right.
I'm
And
assuming.
and to that point, I believe Susan McKelvey sent you a link to our summit we held, which talked about like how do we know and how do we best inform first responders as any technology changes for them? How can they adjust their job to keep them safe?
Yes, I did read through that. It is very interesting that some of the gear without those forever chemicals, absorbed hazardous materials more readily, burned more readily. So firefighters need to, I guess, adjust training to be compensate for that.
Right, right. We know firefighters and first responders are going into a hostile environment, a dangerous, life-threatening environment, and they need to understand the limits of their PPE
Hmm.
at the same time knowing that they're going into a very dangerous environment.
Yeah, yeah. Another question that's come up here in Quincy is, what if there are other chemicals in this, new certified gear that eventually turn out to also be as hazardous, if not more hazardous, like the flame retardant material I'm thinking of.
And those questions are vitally important, and
Right.
that's why NFPA standards are continuously being revised and updated along the
Hmm.
way. So the current standard 1970 is actually open for what we call public input for more proposed changes, because while the committee put in a very long list of restricted substances, as you just said, we will learn and users will learn and manufacturers will learn of pros and cons of different changes, and the standard needs to adjust to that over time. And that's why it's, again, continually revised about every 5 years.
Yeah, sounds like something that every fire department in the nation eventually is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, they will need to update their PPE. It wears out, it ages out, it gets permanently damaged in instance, so they're going to need new PPE. And
Right.
with any new equipment, whether it's PPE or apparatus, there is a very structured onboarding process where the fire department and the first responders learn how this new material, this new equipment performs so
Hmm.
that they can adjust their tactics and the way they operate in the field, again, to ensure that their members remain safe.
Yeah, curious. Do we know what other fire departments in other countries do when it comes to this issue? There are firefighters in every country in the world, I'm sure.
Yeah. Aspects of the world often use NFPA standards.
Do they?
Other parts of the world use different standards as well, and they have different local standards.
Okay.
But one of the things we do know, this overall aspect of the performance of the PPE and the
Mm.
potential toxicity of the way that PPE is being manufactured is very much in the spotlight and has come to the attention to ensure, again, if we go back to my opening comments about contamination control, overall, we want to minimize the exposure first responders have to anything that's toxic, whether it's from the fire, from the equipment they're using, and such. So it's definitely a broader than the United States. It's very much I would believe, a global issue for first
Yeah.
responders.
Yeah, and the issue of washing this gear has also come up, and whether or not that removes enough of the forever chemicals to make them safer. Has that been studied and is that coded in the NFPA language?
So there's actually language around the term around low PFAS gear. There's a limit of in NFPA 1970. The challenge that we have just culturally is that if you were to wash something, it will often then have PFAS in it from the water that you washed it because it's in our water. So it's often mentioned that you want to ensure that it's not intentionally added to create a performance of the fabric, but knowing that when you wash it, when it's exposed to our drinking water, which in many cases does have PFAS in it, that PFAS will get into that material from washing it.
Right, right. So again, it just sounds like it's an evolving study and an evolving science when it comes to this issue. What do fire departments do? They can rely on only what the information they have, right?
Right, absolutely. That's why it's vital, whether it's the city of Quincy, city of Boston, or some other regional department is working with the city and the fire department to say, what do we know today to make the very best decision we can make today? Because in the end, they have to respond to the incidents tomorrow. So we just, as we learn over the years, again, the standards are constantly changing. We're learning new hazards and new challenges that first responders have, and so they need to adjust.
Sure, absolutely. Anything else you could share right now, Christian?
No, I think it's great, and I would encourage your listeners to go to our website, nfpa.org, and look up PPE performance. The materials that you reviewed is published, is there, is in, and I would ask that if you have the opportunity to share a link even to Jesse Roman's article that talked about the challenges that this bringing to the first responders, because it is not an easy, quick 5 minute discussion. There's a lot going on. And it's vitally important as we protect our first responders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It took me about an hour actually to sift through that information,
Yeah,
and
yes.
it left me with more questions than answers, quite
Right, right,
honestly,
right.
because there is no definitive answer. It sounds like right now, at least.
Yeah.
Um, going forward, do you think manufacturers are going to start to come on board now and produce this gear? We're now adherent to this new code.
I believe they have to. They have
Yeah.
to come up to the latest edition of our standards. Will there be challenges? Yes. And will they learn different things? And will first responders using this gear learn different challenges in the field? Absolutely. And when I mentioned earlier, those issues and those challenges will get back into our standards development process
Hmm.
by the firefighters and manufacturers and others that all sit on our committees to
Mm,
understand, okay, now that we've learned this, what does that mean for the next generation of the standard?
right. You mentioned the website, nfpa.org, right? Best place to
Yes,
go.
sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Appreciate your time. Good to talk to
Great.
you.
Awesome, Joe. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.